Assalamu alaikum. The topic of our today's lecture is on GATT, which you've heard many times. When it comes to international political system, GATT plays a significant role. GATT stands for General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. What is this agreement? How it was agreed upon different nations? We're going to discuss in detail today. The process of, as we all know, that the process of globalization started happening around 1890s, and it was by the end of the 19th century that trade was considered to be very free. We have discussed it over and over again when we were discussing about the three major schools of thought in international political system. आप लोगों ने उसके अंदर भी पढ़ा था कि 19th सेंचुरी के अंदर जो है वो ट्रेड वॉज इकोनॉमिक लिबरलाइजेशन की तरफ जो है स्टेट्स जाने लग गए थे. The globalization that began falling at the end of World War One, failing at the end of the World War One at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was chaotic when it comes to the process of globalization and the free market economy. People were clueless. America was controlling everything. The other nations were suffering, and the poor or bad economic policies uh, after World War One, before World War One and after World War One led to the Great Depression of 1930s. The economic pressures pushed countries to impose trade barriers to divert national demand away from imports and towards domestically produced goods. There were trade barriers. States were trying really hard to protect their local businesses, to protect their local industry, and to enhance their local domestic production of the goods. GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, was created after World War II to aid global economic recovery through reconstructing and liberalizing global trade. GATT's main objective was to reduce barriers to international trade through the reduction of tariffs, quotas and subsidies. Quotas हमने डिस्कस किया, सब्सिडी क्या होता है वो हम वन बाय वन करके डिस्कस करेंगे आगे. टैरिफ का मतलब होता है वो अमाउंट ऑफ टैक्स जो इंटरनेशनल प्रोडक्ट के ऊपर आपकी स्टेट लगाती है. क्योटा का मतलब होता है कि कोई स्टेट कितना ज़्यादा मॉनेटरी टर्म्स के अंदर कहना चाहिए इन्वेस्ट कर रही है. सब्सिडी वो होता है जो स्टेट आपको जो है रिलीफ प्रोवाइड करती है किसी भी सिटीजन को रिलीफ प्रोवाइड करने के लिए अपनी तरफ से पेमेंट करती है. GATT, when it comes to the agreement, does still exist, but it has no longer been the main set of rules for international trade. It has been updated, it has been implemented, but it is not much implemented nowadays. The General Agreement of Tariff and Trade always dealt with trade in goods, and it still does. It has been amended and incorporated in the new World Trade Organization agreement. The GATT Agreement on Tariff and Trade was a multilateral agreement regulating international trade. Multilateral का मतलब होता है more than 3 states were involved in that. It was negotiated during the UN Conference on Trade and Employment, and was the outcome of the failure of negotiating governments. It aimed at towards the sustainable reduction of tariffs and other trade barriers when it comes to the international trade, and the elimination of preferences on a reciprocal and mutually advantageous basis. Uh, how did GATT survive? Back then, it was seen just as a temporary measure to regulate the international trade or to improve the conditions of the international trade. It contained almost no constraining institutional agreements, and the general view of the economists or the experienced people who are involved in international trade was that it is not going to work for a very longer period of time, and it will create a chaos internationally, and it will eventually end where there will be no proper regulation of tariffs and trade internationally. Okay, what were the advantages of GATT? The basic advantage was that increased trade. GATT, by increasing trade, GATT promoted world peace. Before World War II, a trade alliance had a 50% chance of succeeding. GATT's success led to Other trade agreements, notably, it led to the European Union, which has prevented wars between its members. GATT rounds, there were certain rounds in which different issues related to international trade were decided. The GATT system, although successful due to highly pragmatic leadership, was imperfect, and so a series of rounds of laborious process of item by item tariff negotiations were held. Tariff वो होता है जो कि गवर्नमेंट अप्लाई करती है on the imports, on the foreign imports. हम पहले भी डिस्कस कर चुके हैं. There were four main principles of GATT. Number one was the most favored nation. आप लोगों ने अक्सर अपनी country के अंदर भी सुना होगा. Article 1 of GATT embodies the most favored nation rule. At its simplest, it requires any favorable treatment granted to a product originating in or destined for any other country to be accorded immediately and unconditionally to the like product originating in or destined for the territories of all other member states. Example for Spanish coffee case, Spain applied a high duty on the types of coffee imported from Brazil while applying low duty on the other coffees considered to be like products. The panel considered this to be a breach of its GATT most favorite nation obligation. ठीक है जी, वो कहते हैं कि जिसको आप MNF स्टेटस दे देंगे उसको आप टैरिफ्स के अंदर रियायत देंगे, उसके टैरिफ जो है वो लोअर रखेंगे, उसके ऊपर आप ड्यूटी जो है वो अप्लाई नहीं करेंगे. दे आर permitted exceptions to the most MNF rule. For example, free trade areas, custom unions, and preferential systems are present for supporting this principle. दूसरी चीज़ है आपके पास national treatment. The national treatment rule in Article 3 of GATT provides that internal taxes, charges, laws, and regulations must not be applied so as to afford protection to domestic production. The imported product must not be subject directly or indirectly to internal taxes in excess of those applied directly or indirectly to the like domestic product. Example for Japan, alcoholic beverages case 1996 imported vodka and other alcoholic beverages versus local sushu, a distilled water spirit, and excessive taxes on the farmers. So nationally आप किस तरह से treat करते हैं, that was also decided among the GATT principles. The third principle was tariffication, protection of the domestic industry by tariffs only. It reinforced through rules which prohibited use of quantitative restrictions. Article 11 of the GATT says this. Limited exceptions are allowed, example for balance of payment reasons. Then there were tariff concessions. Negotiations shall be aimed at reducing tariffs, preamble, and Article 28B of the GATT says this. The tariff shall also be bound against further increase. So आप जो है tariff पे concession देंगे, tariffication को आप low रखेंगे, ठीक है, before in order to maintain this balance of payment. अच्छा जी, फिर एक और जो चीज़ थी, that was International Trade Organization. International Trade Organization (ITO) is a prospective organ proposed by the Bretton Woods Conference to establish rules and regulations for international trade. The ITO Charter was agreed on at the UN Conference on Trade and Employment in March 1948, but was never ratified by the US Senate. This never came into existence. But this trade organization does provide some very useful ideas for directing or for guiding the international trade that was happening across the world during the. Why it was not ratified? The UN member countries were too anxious to begin trade liberalization, which the ITO mainly focused upon. Much of its political support has evaporated. There was a lot of political support when they discussed this issue, but after the process started and every state had to ratify it from its government, the political support was nowhere to be seen. The US Senate and Treasury departments were busy with US reciprocal trade agreements with individual countries, so that is also the main reason behind it. The Cold War had just started, and the International Trade Organization became only of secondary interest to the US politicians and bureaucrats because they were all invested in fighting a Cold War and fighting Russia over various forums indirectly across the world. So they were least interested in investing time and money into the development of international trade organization, and that is the reason why this political the lack of interest on the part of politicians led to the non-ratification of this international trade organization, which would have been really useful otherwise. This is it for today. If you've got any questions regarding today's lecture, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.